As the sun sets over the peaceful ranch community, a mechanical gate clangs shut, cutting off a pair of startled horses mid-gallop. Moments later, a deafening alarm echoes across the valley with flashing lights, sirens, and chaos. Karen Peterson, arms crossed by the keypad, watches in horror as her petty power move unleashes a chain reaction far beyond her control. My name is Jake Donovan, and I'm a lifelong rancher and veteran who recently moved my horses into Meadowbrook Ranch, a rural HOA governed community designed for equestrian living. Despite my quiet nature and friendly demeanor, I quickly ran afoul of Karen Peterson, the HOA president, who insisted my horses were too loud and my use of the shared trail was disruptive. From day one, she made it clear she didn't like outsiders, especially ones who actually use their property for horses instead of just having decorative barn aesthetics. The trouble started small. Karen would leave passive aggressive notes on my mailbox about hoofprints on the trail, even though the trail was literally designed for horses. She complained that my horses neighing at 6 a.m. violated the noise ordinance. Conveniently, ignoring that her own Pomeranian barked nonstop from dawn till dusk. I tried to be neighborly, even brought her fresh eggs from my chickens as a peace offering, but she just wrinkled her nose and said she only ate organic store-bought eggs. Her first official complaint came 2 weeks after I moved in. She showed up at my door with a clipboard and a measuring tape, claiming my horse trailer was parked 3 and over the designated area. When I pointed out that the lines had been painted wrong and my trailer was actually in the correct spot according to the property survey, she huffed and said she'd be reviewing the original blueprints. The next day, I found a $30 fine taped to my trailer for improper parking pending review. Then came the horse height incident. I was out of town for a veterans reunion when my neighbor, elderly Margaret Cooper, called to tell me Karen was in my pasture with a stepladder and measuring tape. By the time I got home, I found a notice stating that Thunder exceeded the community's maximum horse height limit of 16 hands by 2 ends. The rule buried on page 97 of the HOA handbook hadn't been enforced since the community was built. Karen had literally climbed into my pasture to measure my horse while I was gone. Things escalated when Karen began enforcing obscure rules from the HOA handbook that hadn't been touched since 1992. Suddenly, I needed permits for my horse trailer. My hay bales had to be stored at specific angles, and apparently my horses exceeded the maximum allowable height by 2 inches. She measured them herself with a tape measure while I was at work, trespassing on my property in the process. The situation reached a boiling point when Karen discovered she could reprogram the community gate schedule through her HOA president access. Started closing it during what she called quiet hours, which mysteriously aligned with when I needed to move my horses between pastures. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, just when I'd lead Thunder and Lightning through for their daily exercise, the gate would slam shut in our faces. I tried reasoning with her at the monthly HHOA meeting, but she just smiled that fake smile of hers and said she was acting in the community's best interest. The other board members, including Tom Bradley and Susan Hartley, seemed too intimidated to speak up. Karen had been president for 8 years, ruling with an iron fist wrapped in a pastel cardigan. During one particularly memorable meeting, I brought a petition signed by 12 other horse owners in the community, all expressing concerns about the gate schedule changes. Karen dismissed it without even looking at the signature, claiming that petition procedures required a 72-hour advance notice filed in triplicate. When Tom Bradley quietly mentioned he'd never heard of that rule, Karen shot him a look that could have curdled milk and said she'd email him the relevant bylaws later. He never received that email. Um, the psychological warfare intensified when Karen started recruiting allies. She convinced 3 newer residents that my horses were decreasing property values, despite the fact that we lived in a community literally called Meadowbrook Ranch, with horse silhouettes on the entrance sign. She held secret meetings at her house, which I only learned about when Margaret Cooper told me she'd been invited, but refused to attend after Karen called me a disruptive element who didn't understand community standards. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was leading Thunder and Lightning back from the north pasture when the gate suddenly clanged shut right as Thunder was halfway through. The 800-pound horse reared up in panic, nearly crushing me against the metal bars. Lightning, still on the other side, began running in frantic circles, whinnying in distress at being separated from his companion. What Karen didn't know in all her vindictive planning was that our community gate was integrated with the ranch's comprehensive emergency livestock alert system. This wasn't just any gate. It was part of a $50,000 safety network installed after a wildfire nearly destroyed the valley 5 years ago. When the gate detected an obstruction during an unscheduled closure, especially one involving large animals, it triggered the full emergency protocol. The first thing I heard was the siren, a piercing wail that could be heard for miles. Then came the strobe lights mounted on every building and fence post, flashing in a pattern that meant livestock emergency. The automated voice system began broadcasting evacuation instructions over the community speakers. Garage doors throughout the neighborhood automatically opened following the emergency protocol to provide shelter access. The community drone launched from its charging station, its cameras searching for injured animals or fleeing livestock. I managed to calm Thunder enough to back him out of the gate, but the damage was done. Within minutes, volunteer responders began arriving. Bill Morrison from the fire department, Sarah Chen from animal control, and even Dr. Patricia Wells, our local large animal vet, all rushed to the scene expecting a stampede or worse. Karen came running down the path, her face a mask of panic and confusion. She kept pressing buttons on her phone, trying to stop the alarm, but the system had locked her out. Once triggered, only authorized emergency personnel could reset it. She stood there in her pressed khakis and HOA president blazer, watching as more and more people arrived to help with the non-existent emergency. I quickly explained to Bill what had happened while keeping a firm grip on Thunder's lead. Bill's expression darkened as he realized this was a false alarm caused by gate tampering. He radioed dispatch to stand down while Dr. Wells checked both horses for injuries. Thankfully, they were just spooked, not hurt. Sarah from Animal Control started asking questions, and that's when things got interesting. She pulled up the gate's access logs on her tablet, showing every programming change made in the last month. There it was in black and white. Kay Peterson, HOA admin, accessed 17 gate schedule modifications in 30 days, all targeting the exact times I moved my horses. The security footage was even more damning. The gate's camera clearly showed Karen typing in her override code just minutes before we arrived, Amanas manually forcing an emergency closure while grinning at her phone. She'd been watching us approach through the community app, timing it perfectly to cause maximum disruption. Bill Morrison took out his notepad and began writing. Triggering a false emergency alarm was a serious offense, carrying fines up to $10,000. Intentionally endangering livestock added animal cruelty charges. Using HOA authority for personal vendettas violated multiple bylaws. The list kept growing as more evidence surfaced. By now, half the neighborhood had gathered, including the other HOA board members. Tom Bradley looked particularly upset, mentioning that Karen had assured them the gate changes were for security purposes. Susan Hartley revealed that Karen had been collecting complaints about me, but when pressed, admitted she'd never actually verified any of them. Margaret Cooper, still spry at 78, marched up to Deputy Rodriguez with a folder she'd been clutching. Inside were dozens of emails and screenshots documenting Karen's harassment campaign against various residents over the years. She'd been keeping records, waiting for the right moment to expose Karen's abuse of power. The deputy's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of fraudulent fines, fabricated violations, and threatening emails sent from Karen's official HOA president account. Then came the revelation that broke everything wide open. Tom Bradley, finally finding his courage, admitted that Karen had been blackmailing him for 2 years. She discovered his daughter had thrown a graduation party that exceeded the noise ordinance by 5 minutes and threatened to fine him $5,000 unless he voted her way on every board decision. Susan Hartley gasped and added that Karen had done the same to her over a hedge that was supposedly half an inch too tall. The county sheriff arrived next, having been automatically notified by the emergency system. Deputy James Rodriguez reviewed the evidence and informed Karen she was under investigation for reckless endangerment, false emergency reporting, and misuse of emergency systems. Her immediately revoked pending a full investigation. The real satisfaction came at the emergency HOA meeting that night. The community room was packed with neighbors I'd never even met, showing up to voice their opinions. As it turned out, I wasn't the only one who'd suffered under Karen's regime. She'd fined the Johnsons for having the wrong shade of beige on their barn, forced the Millers to remove a memorial garden for their late daughter because it wasn't in the approved landscaping guide, and tried to ban Dr. Wells for making house calls to sick animals because commercial vehicles weren't allowed after 5 p.m. The vote to remove Karen from the board was unanimous, even from her former allies. But the consequences didn't stop there. The investigation revealed she'd been embezzling HOA funds to pay for a private security company to monitor residents she didn't like. She'd installed hidden cameras without board approval and used HOA money to hire a lawyer for her personal disputes. When the final tally came in, Karen faced $23,000 in fines, 200 hours of community service, specifically at the local horse rescue, and 18 months of probation. The judge ordered her to pay restitution for the emergency response costs and my veterinary bills. She also lost her real estate license when the state board learned about her abuse of power, ending her career as the area's self-proclaimed premier horse property specialist. As the judge read the sentence, Karen's face went from red to white to a strange purple color. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish, unable to form words. When she finally managed to speak, all she could say was that this was discrimination against non-horse owners. Um, the judge reminded her that she'd specifically chosen to live in an equestrian community and then tried to prevent people from having horses. Karen collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her reign of terror was over, facing financial ruin and social exile from the community she'd terrorized for nearly a